And the thing is with him, is that everybody likes to hate him. You see, and he likes people that hate him when he's on the stage. And so, you know, so if you put him up there, everyone wants to hate him. So that's what's good for the game.
But from the back of that, I've created this charity. I find you the most deeply offensive man that's breathed oxygen. And quite frankly, if I had a set of darts, I would stick them where the sun don't shine.
Eric Bristow was called the crafty Cockney for a reason, but behind the swagger and trophies were rivalries so bitter, some never healed. These are the 5 players he couldn't stand, and why their stories still turn heads today. For years, Mike Gregory was more than just a fellow competitor to Eric Bristow. He was part of the inner circle, the kind of player Bristow could share a pint with after a tense match, trade banter with in the practice room, and trust on the road. They weren't just linked by the oche, they were linked by the grind, the late nights, the travel, and the mutual respect that only comes from standing shoulder to shoulder in the heat of competition. But in 1993, darts hit one of its most dramatic turning points. The sport was divided, with top professionals frustrated over declining television coverage and shrinking prize money. Bristow, never one to shy away from a fight, became a driving force behind the breakaway that would become the Professional Darts Corporation, PDC. He believed this was the only way to drag darts back into the spotlight and give players the respect and the pay they deserved. Gregory was right there alongside him in the early talks. He joined the meetings, signed the letters, and stood as one of the faces of the rebellion. To Bristow, this wasn't just a professional decision, it was a pledge of loyalty. But then came the twist no one saw coming. On the eve of the split becoming official, Gregory made a sudden U-turn. In a move that would go down as one of the most infamous in darts history, he decided to return to the British Darts Organisation BDO, abandoning the new PDC before it even had a chance to take flight. For Bristow, this wasn't just about choosing a different side, it was personal. To him, Gregory's last-minute defection wasn't a business decision, it was betrayal. The crafty Cockney was known for his sharp tongue, and he didn't hold back. He publicly accused Gregory of stabbing him in the back and privately vowed he'd never forgive him. Those who knew Bristow say the fallout was so deep that he refused to even acknowledge Gregory's presence at events. Years later, when asked about it, Bristow still bristled, his voice hardening as if the wound had never healed. Gregory, for his part, claimed he was simply doing what he thought was best for his career at the time. But the damage was done. In Bristow's eyes, loyalty was everything, and once that trust was broken, there was no going back. The Gregory saga became one of the most talked about rifts in darts, a reminder that behind the bright lights and roaring crowds, friendships could shatter in an instant. And as bitter as this was, it was only the first of several rivalries that would follow Bristow throughout his career. Do you want me to roll right into a long detailed section 2 on Keith Deller next? That one's packed with drama. In 1983, Eric Bristow was at the peak of his powers. He'd already carved out a reputation as darts' biggest personality and most feared competitor, part showman, part assassin on the oche. That year's World Championship at Yoli's Cabaret Club was supposed to be just another step on his march to total domination. His opponent in the final, a 23-year-old newcomer named Keith Deller, was seen by most as little more than a warm-up act for Bristow's coronation. The match started as expected. Bristow confident, composed, almost casual in his play. He had the crowd, the swagger, and the record to back it up. But what happened next would go down as one of the sport's greatest upsets. Deller didn't just play well, he played fearlessly. He matched Bristow dart for dart, refusing to be intimidated by the legend staring him down across the stage. The turning point came in the final set. Bristow, known for his cold-blooded finishing, had a choice: play safe and set up a comfortable double, or go for the kill. In a rare moment of miscalculation, he chose to leave himself on 32, giving Deller a shot at an audacious 138 checkout. It was the kind of finish most players wouldn't even dare in a world final, but Deller went for it and nailed it. Triple 20, triple 18, double 12. The crowd exploded. Bristow froze. The title was gone. For Bristow, the loss stung far beyond the scoreline. It wasn't just that he'd been beaten, it was the fact that he'd been beaten on the biggest stage, in front of a packed house, by someone he considered a rookie. Over the years, Bristow rarely missed a chance to remind people that he'd let Deller win, suggesting that his tactical choice was an act of generosity that backfired. Della, of course, never saw it that way. The two men would cross paths many times in exhibitions and on the pro circuit, with Bristow often needling him, half joking, half serious. Fans loved the rivalry. It had that perfect mix of skill, ego, and history. But for Bristow, the memory of 1983 was like a splinter he could never quite dig out. It was proof that even the king of darts could be toppled when the moment was right. And if Della's win was a shock to the system, Bristow's next rivalry was something far more personal. Two alpha personalities locked in a battle that sometimes felt bigger than the sport itself. Jocky Wilson was everything Bristow wasn't, and that's exactly why their rivalry burned so hot. Where Bristow was polished and calculated, Jocky was raw and unpredictable. A Scottish firebrand with a heavy throw and an even heavier personality, Wilson didn't just step up to the oche, he attacked it. The moment he walked on stage, you knew sparks were coming. The two first met in the early 1980s when darts was exploding in popularity and the big names were becoming household figures. From the start, Bristow recognized that Wilson was different. He didn't flinch under pressure, didn't buy into the crafty Cockney mind games, and most importantly, he'd look Bristow dead in the eye during a handshake, a subtle gesture that Bristow himself admitted very few dared to do. Matches between them were pure theatre. Bristow's smooth, almost cocky style clashed beautifully with Wilson's aggressive, sometimes chaotic approach. The crowd always split into two camps, those who worshipped Bristow's dominance and those who loved Wilson's underdog defiance. Their duels were peppered with psychological battles, stares, smirks, and the occasional muttered word designed to rattle the other. Offstage, their personalities clashed just as much. Bristow could be cutting with his banter, and Wilson, never one to hold back, gave as good as he got. There were reports of heated arguments backstage, some fueled by competition, others by the era's famously heavy drinking culture. Yet, for all the tension, there was also a strange mutual respect. Each man knew the other brought out his best game. Bristow often said that only Wilson and John Lowe had the courage to truly stand toe-to-toe with him, both mentally and physically. Wilson relished that recognition. He wasn't intimidated, and that in itself was enough to make their rivalry one of the most compelling in darts history. If Wilson was the storm Bristow had to weather, then John Lowe was the mountain he had to climb, an opponent whose presence defined an entire era of the sport. If Eric Bristow was the showman of darts, John Lowe was its ice-cold tactician. Where Bristow thrived on theatrics, swagger, and psychological warfare, Lowe was all business, a steady, unflinching presence who never rose to bait. The two dominated darts in the 1980s, and their rivalry became the backbone of the sport's golden era. Bristow knew that Lowe was dangerous in a way few others were. He wasn't flashy, but he was relentless. Match after match, Lowe's consistency was like a slow squeeze. You never saw the knockout punch coming, but he'd chip away until you were out of air. That style drove Bristow crazy. He thrived on rattling opponents, but Lowe never blinked. The more Bristow tried to get inside his head, the more Lowe's expression stayed locked in that calm, poker-faced stare. Their clashes weren't just battles of skill, they were duels of identity. Bristow represented the loud, fast-talking London crowd-pleaser. Lowe, the disciplined, no-nonsense sportsman from Derbyshire. The contrast made for legendary finals, each man pushing the other to the limit. Fans knew that whenever these two stepped up to the oche, they were about to witness darts at its purest and most intense. Over time, their mutual respect grew, even if the rivalry never truly cooled. Bristow once admitted that Lowe was one of only two players, alongside Jocky Wilson, who could look him in the eye without flinching, a small but telling sign of toughness in a sport where mind games were often as important as accuracy. And while they eventually became friends off the oche, the competitive edge between them never faded. But if Lowe was the calm, steady rival, the next name on Bristow's list was pure theatre, someone who matched his flair, his love of the crowd, and his knack for stirring up a little chaos when the moment called for it. Bobby George was the only man who could step on stage with Bristow and match his charisma shot for shot. Known as the King of Bling, George turned darts into a spectacle, gold chains, sequin shirts, and a walk-on that felt more like a rock concert than a sporting entrance. For Bristow, who prided himself on being the sport's ultimate entertainer, Bobby was both a kindred spirit and a constant thorn in his side. Their matches were explosive, not just because of the darts, but because of the personalities involved. Both men loved the crowd's attention, and both knew how to play the villain if it meant getting inside the other's head. When Bristow would fire off a quick-paced leg, George would slow things down, smile at the audience, maybe even crack a joke mid-match. Little mind games that frustrated Bristow to no end. Off the stage, the tension didn't always cool. Both were products of darts' hard-living era, where late nights and heavy drinking were the norm. There were stories, some true, some exaggerated, of the two exchanging sharp words in pubs after exhibitions, their egos clashing as much over personality as over darts. But for all the heat, there was also a strange camaraderie. They were two sides of the same coin, performers who understood that darts was as much about entertainment as it was about competition. Fans loved it. When Bristow and George met, you knew you were getting more than a match, you were getting a show. The tension was real, but so was the electricity, and both men knew how to make the most of it. Yet as fiery as their rivalry could be, it was still wrapped in the spectacle of the sport. The real question though was how all of these rivalries, each bitter in its own way, would shape Bristow's lasting legacy in darts. Eric Bristow's career wasn't just defined by the trophies he lifted, it was shaped, sharpened, and sometimes scarred by the players who stood across from him. Mike Gregory's last-minute defection showed the crafty Cockney that loyalty in darts could be as fragile as a wire on the bullseye. Keith Daller's fearless upset proved that even kings can be toppled in one perfect moment. Jocky Wilson's raw intensity reminded him that some battles are fought as much with pride as with points. John Lowe's icy precision pushed him to the limits of patience and skill, creating a rivalry that defined a decade. And Bobby George's showmanship forced him to share the spotlight, whether he liked it or not. Individually, each story is a snapshot, a single moment in the chaotic, glittering world of 1980s and 90s darts. But together, they tell the tale of a man who thrived in the heat of competition, who needed the friction to keep his edge. Bristow didn't just play against these men, he built his identity in opposition to them. The respect was there, sometimes buried deep, sometimes worn on his sleeve, but so was the fire. And maybe that's the real reason Eric Bristow is still talked about today. It wasn't just his skill or his swagger, it was the drama, the grudges, the moments that made darts more than just a game of numbers on a board. Love him or hate him, he made you feel something, and in sport that's the only way to be truly unforgettable, because in the end, the trophies gather dust, but the rivalries, those live forever.